Hello and welcome to today's tutorial. In today's video, I will show you how to cut and sew a princess dart pencil gown. I already have on this channel videos on how to draft a princess dart bustier half bodice and how to cut and sew a princess dart bustier top, and I will drop the link to these videos in the description box. I really appreciate all of you who take out your time to check out my videos, and if this is your first time of checking my video, you're highly welcome. If you have not subscribed, please click on the subscribe button and also on the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you. So I have folded the fabric for the front using the biggest body circumference, which is the hip, plus extra 3 inches, and also I folded according to the length of the dress, which is 40 inches plus extra 3 inches for hemming. I've also ruled out my vertical measurements. The first line is my shoulder line, and from there to the second line, which is 8 inches, is my chest line. From the shoulder line to 10.5 is my bust point line, 16 inches is my half length, and 24 inches my hip line, and then the length of the dress, which is 40 inches. Then I would draw out my shoulder slope using the 8 inches standard, and from the 8 inches point I came down by 1 inch, and I'll connect to the 3 inches point to have my shoulder slope. Then on my shoulder line, I'm also going to impute half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8.5, and I'll also impute this measurement on my chest line. Then I will draw a line to connect these 2 points together. To draw my armhole curve, I would impute quarter of my bust measurement on the chest line, which is 9.5. I would impute that on the chest line, 9.5, and then I would check what I have on the line from the shoulder slope to the chest line, and I'll find the middle of that line, and from the middle I'll come in by half inch. I'll come in by 0.5 inches, and then using my armhole curve, I'll connect the point from the chest line where I have the 9.5 inches, quarter of my bust measurement, to the half inch I came in by, and then to the shoulder slope. I'll make a curve, and this will be the curve for the front armhole. So I would impute the rest of the circumference measurement. I've already imputed quarter of my bust measurements on the chest line. So on the waistline, I would impute quarter of my waist measurement plus 1 inch for that. Quarter of my waist measurement is 7.75 plus 1 inch for that would make that 8.75. So I'll impute that on the waistline. Then on my hip line, I will impute quarter of my hip measurement, which is 10.75. Then on the hem line, I'll impute what I have on my hip line. I would subtract 1.25 inches from that, and then impute the remaining, that is 9.5, on my hem line. So I will now connect these points together using a straight ruler. I'll connect from the chest line to the waistline, and then using a curve ruler, I'll connect from the waist to the hip where my hip measurement is, and then use a straight ruler to connect from the hip line to the hem line, and also then connect to the seam allowance, the hemming allowance. Now I will impute half of my bust span measurement, which is 4 inches plus half inch seam allowance, making it 4.5 inches. I will impute this on the bust point line, the waistline, the hip line, and also on the hem line, and I'll connect together all these points together using a ruler. Next, I will take that on my waistline. On the line I just ruled, on the waistline, I'll take half inch that on both sides of this line I just ruled, and then from the bust point line, I'll come down by 1 inch and then connect using a straight ruler. I'll connect from that 1 inch I came down by to the half inch on the waistline on both sides. I'll connect them together, and then from the hip line I'll come up by 2 inches. I'll come up by 2 inches and also connect the dart on the waist to this line I came up by. I'll connect as you see me do. Then for the armhole dart, I'll measure what I have from the shoulder slope to the chest line. I have 8 inches and half of that is 4 inches plus half inch seam allowance, which make it 4.5. I will note that point, and from that point I'll connect to my bust point line. I'll connect to that on the bust point line, and then I'll take half inch on both sides of this line I made on the armhole and also connect it to the bust point line. I would connect to the bust point line as you see me do. I'll connect the 2 points, the half inches I took, to the bust point line. To avoid shortage, I'll measure what I would remove, the dart I would remove, and that's 1 inch, and I would replace it to the other dart leg as you see me do. I'll also measure what I have on the chest line that I'll be cutting out, and that's about 1/4 inch, and I'll replace that as well on the chest line, and then I'll redraw my armhole, and this will be my new armhole. This is to avoid shortage when sewing. Then I'll go ahead and smoothen out the curve on the bust point line. So after this, the next thing will now be to add my seam allowances. I would take my measurements again and check that they are complete, and then on the chest line I will be adding 2.25 inches for seam allowance, 1 inch for joining the darts, and 1.25 inches for the side seam allowance. Also on the waistline I will also add 2.25 inches seam allowance because I've already added the darts allowance when cutting the waist. I will then add 2.25 inches seam allowance all down on the hip line and also on the hemline, and then I'll connect the points I've made together. This dress will be fully lined, so I've placed my lining underneath the main fabric, and I'll cut the fabric and the lining together, just that the lining will be 4 inches shorter than the main fabric. For the neckline, I'm using a neck width of 4.5 inches and a neck depth of 5 inches for the front neckline, but I'll be making the front neckline a sweetheart neckline. So for the sweetheart neckline, I'll be going up by 1.5 inches as you see me do, and then I'll draw out the curve for the sweetheart neckline. I would use the armhole curve to make the sweetheart neckline as you see me do. I went ahead to adjust my neckline. I increased it to 5.5 inches, the depth of the neckline. So I adjusted, and that is it for my neckline. On the shoulder, I took half inch seam allowance for joining the shoulders together. Then I'll go ahead and cut out the front part of this dress. So when cutting out the armhole, be careful and remember to cut from the new redrawn armhole. Take your time and cut, and before cutting, make sure that the measurements are correct before cutting out. So that's it for the front part. The next thing now will be to cut out the back part. I folded the fabric for the back into 2, and I have an allowance which I've drawn out, 1 inch allowance for my zipper, and all my measurements will start from this 1 inch. And I'm also doing the same thing, taking the shoulder slope, but for the shoulder slope for the back I will be taking half inch from the 8 inches point, and I'll connect to the 3 inches point. That would be the difference from the back from the front. And I'll also find the center the way I did for the front armhole, but I will not come in by half inch, and I'll connect to the chest line. That's also another difference from the back and the front. I'll also take my measurements, the same measurements as I did for the front part, and I'll connect from the bust to the waistline, from the waistline to the hip line, and then to the hemline, same measurements as that of the front parts that we've already cut out. So I'll also take my dart like I did in the front, but on the back I did not impute the bust point line, just the chest line, the waist line and the hip line. I'll also, from the chest line, I'll come down by 1 inch and then take that half-inch dart on both sides like I did in the front and connect. Then from the hip I would connect. I'll also come up by 2 inches and connect like I did for the front part. Then on the armhole as well, I would check what I have on my armhole, find the middle of that and add half inches to that, and then from that point I will connect to the 1 inches I came down by from the chest line. As you see me do, I'll connect. But on the armhole I will not take any dart since it's the back and there's no bust at the back, so I will just connect. I won't take any dart from the armhole, and from that point I would extend by half an inch to avoid shortage and also join it back to the chest line. And that will be that for the darts at the princess dart for the back. For the neckline, I will take the same neck width of 4.5 and a neck depth of 1.5 for the back, and I'll connect, and that will be that for the neckline. 4.5 neck width by 1.5 neck depth, and I would connect. I'll also add my seam allowance of 2.25 inches on the back like I did for the front part. On the zipper allowance side, to avoid zip bulge on the waistline, I'll come in by half an inch and connect it to the chest line and then connect down towards the hip line. This is to avoid zip bulge. Then I'll go ahead and cut out the back. Always remember to recheck your measurements before cutting. I almost forgot about the shoulder joining allowance, and I just added that now. I've added the half-inch shoulder allowance I added in the front to the back, and then I completed cutting the back part, and that's it for the back part. So I've gone ahead to iron gum stay to the bust area just to give it a bit of stability. I would drop a link in the description box on how to properly pad your bustier blouse in case you do not have an idea on how to go about this. So I've just added a gum stay to the bust area to give it stability. Then the next thing I will do now will be to join the darts together using half-inch seam allowance, and I'll start joining from the hem part, from the lower part, then up to the bust area. I'll join them together, and the same thing I do to the main fabric I'll also do to the lining fabric. So after joining, I've joined the darts together and I've ironed the seams open. So what I will do now, I'm going to reshape my armhole. Initially I didn't want to add sleeve to this, but I decided to add sleeve, so I came down by half inch from the bust chest line, and I'm reconnecting and redrawing my armhole to enable me add sleeve to it, so that when I add the sleeve it will not be tight. So I'm extending my armhole by half an inch. I'll also do the same thing to the back part of the dress. After joining the darts together, I'll also go ahead and redraw my armhole for the back, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm redrawing the armhole for the back. I've also joined the darts for the back together and I've ironed the seam open. I did same for the lining piece. I also ironed the seams open and also retraced the armhole. So after doing this, the next thing will be to join them together by the shoulder using the half-inch seam allowance I left for it. With the right sides facing each other, I will join them by the shoulder. I will do same for the lining piece and then use the lining piece to turn the neckline for the main piece. For the main fabric, I'll also top stitch towards the lining part. I've already done that. I've turned the neckline. I've also top stitched towards the lining piece. So I top stitch towards the lining piece, and the next thing now will be to shape the dress. So what I will do now would be to join the main fabrics with the right sides facing each other. I'm going to join the main fabric separate and then the lining separate. I've joined them, I've placed them on each other. I'll use the 1.25 inches I left for seam allowance and hold them by the sides on both sides, and then also I will turn the lining right sides facing each other, and I'll also sew using 1.25 inches seam allowance. I'll hold the lining piece together, then I'll iron the seams open. So I've done that, I've joined them together, and this is what the dress looks like for now. I've joined together and I've ironed the seams open. So next thing I will do will be to use the lining piece to turn the hem part of the dress. So I would place them together, right sides facing each other, and then I would pin all through the lower part. I'll pin the main fabric and the lining fabric together, and then I would sew together from one end to the other using 1/2 inch seam allowance. I also made sure that the seam parts on the main fabric and on the lining align with each other as I was pinning, so that everything would align and look neat. So I have sewn together, and this is it. Next thing now will be to close the zipper allowance side that is still open. I would sew right sides facing each other. I'll sew from top to the bottom part, and I'll sew on both sides. I'll close the zipper allowance for both sides. Now that we have turned all the rough sides inside, so the next thing now will be to attach my zipper to the back part of the dress. So I would turn my dress to the back part, I'll turn to the back part, and then I would measure where I want my zipper to stop, and from there I would then hold the fabric together, the back part together, using 1 inch seam allowance. I'll hold them together using 1 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to be leaving a slit at the lower part. So I would measure. So for the slit, I measured 7 inches for my slit. So I would sew from where I want my zipper to stop, then to this point before the 7 inches for the slit. That is what I would sew together. I'll join these points together and then attach my zipper. So after attaching this zipper to the dress, I also attached my sleeve to the dress, and that brings us to the end of this video. Please like this video, also share with your friends, subscribe if you have not subscribed to my channel, and please take out your time to check out my other videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video. Bye.